in the beginning.
God created the earth, yes.
So give us your origin story.
Where do you want to start? Is what I'm saying. Yeah.
Where were you born?
I'm sorry.
So where were you born?
Where was I born?
Yeah, where were you born? What was it like growing up? Where did you grow up?
Okay. I was born on an island, is what I tell people. The island is Manhattan. Never lived there, but grew up in the Bronx, which is the New York City's only mainland borough. Everything else is an island. People don't realize it's an island city. And growing up in the Bronx in the Highbridge section, in the, I guess from second grade elementary all the way through college, et cetera, marriage, et cetera. I always felt secure living in that area because my feeling was if the earth ever flooded, we were high enough and we were probably the only place in the city that wouldn't flood. I had a strange twist to thinking about things in those days.
Hey, that's how I feel about, I was going to say, that's how I feel about living in Chicago. I think we're in a pretty good place in case of waters rising or fires or things like that. But
yeah.
So I get it.
Chicago is the broad shoulders, of the country.
Yeah, exactly.
Whoops, I think I hit something here, Marvin, turn the picture off. I was just moving this down and all of a sudden it...
Oh, crap, you went out of it. Let's see.
I still see you, so.
You can still see me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I can't see you.
Did you hit a
I
different
seem
window?
to have a Zoom, hold on a second.
I have no idea what you had.
I was just sliding the
Yes, I
paper.
know.
Yeah.
Let me sit down for a moment.
Okay, hold on a second. We'll be right back.
You can see us, but we can't see you.
Yeah. Do you accidentally go to a different window?
There we are. Okay.
All right, can you see us?
Yep.
Okay.
Well,
And
okay, where was I? Growing up in the Bronx.
Yes. So you lived in one place for a couple years, right? And then you moved in with your grandparents?
Yeah. We have lived over in the East Bronx. And I don't know whether it was because they knew my grandfather was ill or what was happening. But suddenly we moved in a large apartment with my grandparents and my Aunt Sarah. I think was living with them at the time. I'm not sure. Or maybe she hadn't moved in yet. I think her husband was still alive. But I remember it just being an apartment on the ground floor that ran like forever, with people constantly coming over. My grandparents came from Kiev in the Ukraine. And my mother and her two sisters were born there, whereas the boys, my two uncles, were born in this country after they came over. And as I say, we moved in when my grandfather got ill. And it was interesting living there because it seemed like every weekend the place was loaded with people, family, the cousins, and whatever. My grandparents belonged to one of the societies. Um, whether it was a theater, they went to theaters, uh, generally Yiddish theater, which was popular in New York at the time. And they had lots of, it seemed, cousins. Everybody was a cousin. And they came over, they would play cards. There was Cousin Fanny that I remember playing poker with the guys, constantly with the cigarette dangling out of the corner of her mouth. People would come from other places carrying their own bedding, in a sense, and the long hallway over the weekend, people would sleep on the floor and stay for the weekend. So there was constantly food and people. It seemed like every weekend to me.
Mhm.
But that's the child image, I don't know.
And how old were you when you lived there?
When I lived there, it was like from kindergarten to first grade, and a couple of years before that. So probably about 3 or 4 years. Uh,
And this is your mom's parents?
my mother's parents, yeah. Um,
Did they, so what, so they came from Kiev, so what, hi Jasper. He wants to ask questions too.
okay.
So what languages did they speak?
I don't know with them. My parents used to speak Yiddish when they didn't want my sister and I to hear what they were saying or understand. I think they probably spoke Russian.
Okay.
Or who knows, you know.
Right.
On my father's side, for example, my grandmother, his mother, spoke 7 languages, spoke
Wow.
and wrote in 7 languages.
Wow.
So everything like in Eastern Europe, they spoke.
So
His
you and your sister didn't learn Yiddish?
No, I mean,
Why
we
not?
picked up, you know, some ultimately,
Hmm.
but it was the way that so the kids wouldn't understand. That's what they would do, as was done with them with their parents. My father's family, as Marvin's family, came from the same place in what was then the Austrian Empire, which is somewhere in the center of Poland now in today's world. And we found that out after your father was born, when the families got together and they started reminiscing. And we found out that they came from either the same town or towns close to each other in Poland, which was interesting. So my background, I suppose, is a combination of Polish and Ukrainian, and I don't speak either language. Well, I
So is
learned
that just like because the reason why they didn't teach you any of those languages? Because like I've heard like a lot of immigrants around that time like wanted their kids to be American, and so they.
That's basically what it was. They didn't want us to be other than American, speak English. And what are you laughing? We'll get to that eventually. He's talking about his grandmother, who, as I recall the story, if I may, traveled all over New York City by herself. And as far as the family was concerned, she did not speak English. And what happened, Marvin? One day she said when she was.
She spoke to me in English all the time. And I didn't understand the fact that she didn't speak to everybody else, including the older, the adult people, and including my cousins and my sister and so on.
He was a favorite.
She spoke to them in Yiddish. And I complained to her one day about the fact that, I really feel left out, Grandma, because, you don't speak Yiddish to me. You speak Yiddish to everyone else. And she said, because you're the brightest one in the family, I want you to be an American.
So that's basically the attitude.
Yeah.
They grew up basically in the same neighborhood as I say, when the families got together at your father's bris, they all knew each other, including the rabbi, who came from the same neighborhood.
Right.
He was the guy who converted Elizabeth Taylor to to Jewish when she married one of the Jewish husbands. But it was an interesting day at listening to all the tales of the two families knowing each other before.
Right, because I remember, I think there was a time we watched Aunt Carol and Uncle Danny's wedding video, and like there were flams in it too, and I was like, how do they, I mean, everybody grew up in that, they were all in the same neighborhood, and like, so everybody knew each other, and I thought that was interesting, because like, there's, I mean, like I grew up in the same neighborhood as Mike, but like, I don't know if all of our families would have been at
That close?
There's wedding, yeah.
Well, you lived in like the suburbs where there were homes.
Right.
They lived in apartments.
Right.
In the city. And so everything was close. They all went to the same local, butchers and grocery stores. This was a time, even when I was growing up, where the supermarkets were just coming into being. There would be like a neighborhood, in our neighborhood, for example, in Highbridge, there was a deli, there was a hardware store, there was this, that, various cleaners. And beyond that, there was like a market that was like an open air market with individual people renting, selling fruits or selling deli or selling meats or fish or, whatever. We didn't have the concept of supermarkets then, like we have today, where you go in and they have everything. They were just coming into being. I think Safeway was the first in our neighborhood that appeared. So it was a totally different time. Everything we needed, we went to the corner grocery store. Antonoff and Greenberg, A&G. That's before the A and P. And they were funny, they were two Jewish guys with accents. So what can I do for you today? Kind of thing. And you come in with a list and they would get you what you needed. And on the way out or before you were done, are you sure you don't need some? Oh yeah, or that kind of thing.
Right.
And strangely enough, by the time I was in high school, and one of their daughters was working for a pediatrician, and she was graduating, so she was giving up the job. And they asked me if I wanted it. So that's how I met the pediatrician I ultimately used. But I worked for her for a couple of years going through college. And she ultimately became pediatrician for the kids when they were growing up until we moved out of the city. And I had looked up the other day, about a year ago. She was still living and she was 99 years old.
Wow.
She was an interesting lady. At the time, she had only one child and one dog. I babysat both from time to time. So it was an interesting job.
So what did you do were you like at front desk or?
I'm sorry?
What did you do? What did you do when you worked there?
I ran her office. I made the appointments. The first day on the job, she handed me an infant that was tongue-tied that she had just clipped underneath the tongue and said, "Stop the bleeding." I said, "How?" So she told me, and I did it. Not a problem. She dealt with all sorts of things. I wound up basically, as I say, making the appointments, running the office, explaining to people why she was late, and writing even letters to her sister that she didn't have time to write to. I don't know what else to say. It was, just one of those silly, kinds of things. And I did find somebody for her when I left. So,
That's good.
and my job after that was, after we got married, is working for in the pathology department of the University of Michigan, typing pathological diagnoses. And at first they thought I was too young to do it, so they had an older woman there who didn't understand the language, the technical language. And so I wound up doing most of the typing of the diagnoses. And it was always fascinating because the Canadians always pronounce things differently. We would get the reports via the old tapes, and you'd be listening and trying to type up the stuff. And if you had the Canadians, I'd wonder what the hell are they talking about? So it's just a totally different pronunciation of things.
Right.
But we finally got that squared away. The man who ran the department was also editor of the Journal of Pathology. And his claim to fame was that he was an expert on mustard gas poisoning from World War I.
Wow.
He was in his 80s at the time. And fascinating. One of his sons was involved in the polio vaccine development at Michigan.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So interesting times. But when I got pregnant working in the office there, there were 4 of us that all became pregnant around the same time, and the doctors wanted to conduct a study to see if it was contagious. So we had fun.
Yeah. It sounds like it.
And, did you want to get back to anything else?
Yeah, we can go back to your childhood. So, tell me about your parents. So tell me about your mom. What do you remember about her, and like,
Okay.
what was her personality like?
Well, she, it's interesting. She was basically, a quiet woman, in a sense, who grew up in New York City. Her claim to fame, I was told in growing up, is that she was basically a tomboy, which I took after her in that sense. She used to ride the boys on the handlebars of her bike. She swam the currents of the East River and has been known to have swum across and back the Hudson River at the time.
Wow.
So she was athletic. And she had friends and very social. I understand that she was almost engaged to somebody who died of some sort of stomach ailment. And then my father came along. I'm sorry, what?
Must have been her cooking.
It must have been her cooking, he said. Anyway, no. What she worked, let's see, what was it? Some sort of candy factory or something where she met what became our Uncle Tony. And he was a friend of the family forever. He never married. He was in the service in World War I and World War II as a cook. And he, as I say, he was a friend of hers for since day one, a friend of the family. We could just consider him another uncle growing up. So that's the way she was. She made friends easily, and living in the Bronx and in our apartment after we moved to the West Bronx, to Highbridge, it became what I call Grand Central Station. Everybody in the building, if they had a problem, they would come and talk to Rose. And that's what it was. If somebody in the family was sick, like my cousin, her cousin Rose, who they called Little Rose because she was younger than my mother, but she was like a good head taller than my mother. So it always struck me funny. Had a back operation, and she recuperated at our place. So I think that she was there a good 2 or 3 months with her little boy, and her husband used to come for dinner every night during that time. That was the way my mother was. I think Sarah may have lived with us at the time. I'm not sure. So we had, it was basically a one-bedroom apartment. Carol and I slept in the living room. So every time somebody came to stay, my mother opened up another couch. So that's the way we grew up. My only privacy was we had one big closet. Sometimes I just go in and close the door. It was big enough to have a seat and had a light in there. So that was all right. It's probably why I started playing ball. I would go outside in the backyard and just practice throwing the ball. I was fascinated playing the boys' games, stickball on the street. And later, I used to go to I played with the boys' team on the block. We would play games against other neighborhoods down at the park, basically stickball. And my father would always accompany me to protect me, make sure everything was all right. And I don't know if I had ever told you that the name of the team, one of the leaders told me, they called themselves the Trojans because every game was in the bag. And I had no idea what they were talking about. So, getting back to my mother, as I say, which we started with, when she had her Tuesday night mahjong games. Other than that, she was always home. Those used to rotate, amongst friends or whatever. But that was, I think, what had created the first problem that they had with me when I was very, very small is that my mother was out playing mahjong that night. My father was supposed to be watching me, and he read me a story that put him to sleep. And by the time my mother got home, they couldn't find me. So they went all over the place. They finally found me sleeping underneath the kitchen table, and my father decided, let's stop for a minute and I'll have a cup of coffee and we'll figure out what to do. And that's where they found me, sleeping under the table. I hope your daughter doesn't give you that many problems, but I seem to have created some for them. Sometimes in the middle of the night, I would get out of the crib. And one night they went looking for me, could not find me anywhere. And where I was sitting, and they had a big barrel chair. I turned the light on, I was reading the Sunday comics upside down. And that's how they found me. And they said, why didn't you say anything when we were going by? I said, I didn't know what you wanted, what you were looking for me. I also had a certain weirdness, I suppose you would call it, looking at people. My aunt had friends, a pair of twins. And They were lovely ladies, very sweet, but to me, they looked like the witch and the Wizard of Oz. So when I first met them, all I saw were two people coming toward me, or actually one person, because they came through the doorway one at a time, that looked like split in two. So I went running underneath the crib and I wouldn't come out. That's how I saw things, a little different than most, I suppose. When we were talking last time, you had mentioned something about my father's tools, and I couldn't recall at the moment, but at that time too, I had always watched him work with the tools. And so I borrowed them, sat underneath the stove and unscrewed the legs. My father grabbed me out of there before the whole thing collapsed, and took him a day and a half to put it all back together again. So I was proficient with unscrewing and screwing things up. I'm trying to think of what else at that particular time. The story of the bathroom with Sally that we were talking about
Right, yeah.
last time was that Sally, my mother was a friend of Millie, who had two sisters, and each sister was like a friend of my mother's two sisters. The older one was a friend of my Aunt Sarah, Esther and Sarah, and the younger one, Lily and Helen, were friends. They grew up together in the same neighborhood, and the friendship lasted a lifetime. So when Sally was born, the two of us were always put together. And one night we, as kids do, went to the bathroom together. We locked the door. We couldn't get it open. And they tried to telling us what to do, turn it this way, pull the handle. We couldn't move the lock. So they told us to get into the bathtub. They were going to break down the door. The problem was that the door had a mirror on the back, and that's why they wanted us in the tub away from the door. And they did smash the door down and got us out.
Wow.
But
So do you know what happened to the lock? It just jammed, or?
We couldn't turn it. Once it locked, we were too small. We were, 4 or 5 years old. We just couldn't. And why we locked it, I don't know. We, just automatically, I suppose.
Right.
But another thing with Sally and I is we each had these little diamond rings. And another bathroom story basically was we put them down on the counter. She put hers back on. Mine went down the drain.
Oh no.
And so when we let the water out, it flushed. When the guys took the bottom out to see if it was still there, gone.
Oh, no.
So I got lectured on that. And I didn't know whether my father was telling me not to wash my hands again or not to take my ring off and put it on the, again, we were, under 5 years old. It was preschool time.
Right.
So we would get into all sorts of little trouble.
Right, yeah. Makes sense. So tell me about your dad. So what was he like? What did he do?
Strangely enough, at the beginning, he was born, my grandmother said it was the easiest birth. He was 15 and a half pounds.
Jeez.
She said he basically just dropped out.
It's huge.
And that she would have to tell people that he was like 6 months older than he was. In his first year, though, seriously, he had polio and survived it. But it left him with a limp that he always had for the rest of his life. So, interesting times. He became the family protector in a sense for his brothers and whatever. Um, he, my grandfather, he said, used to send him to get the Daily Forward, which was the Yiddish newspaper in New York. And he saw a stack of papers that he could pick up one for free. He didn't realize they were the day before's paper. And that way he could take that penny and go get some candy for himself. He said he got chewed out by his father for doing that. He didn't want yesterday's news. During the Depression, he ultimately took a job with Con Edison in New York as a temporary measure because it was something, that paid him as a meter reader. And he retired like 50 some odd years later from Con Edison, not doing the same job, but doing other things within the company. So yeah, it was he was a good guy. He would take me to ball games. And it was at a ball game with him that I found I had always said if I found a girl seemed good enough for me to play with, I would probably join them. Well, we were at a boys game because some of the neighborhood boys played down at the park in uniform, like the Little League today, only it wasn't as organized. And we were down at the game, and I'm looking behind us at the softball field, and there was a girls' team playing. So I told my father I'm going to go over and look, and then I called him over, and I said, they're good enough. He says, so talk to them, and I did. And they were a very good team. So I played with them through the end of elementary school and through most of high school till about my junior year. AAU championships for 3 years in a row, New York City championships for 5 years in a row. We even beat the boys Bronx team playing a softball game. They played baseball, we played softball, and a 15-11 slugfest or something. We beat them. When I watched the girls play today on some of the college teams, we had a gal who was as fast as any of them, and another gal, a black gal, Skip, who threw some sort of curveball that sort of dropped that nobody could hit. So we had a lot of fun. I played first base because I was left-handed and I wanted to be in on the action.
Right.
And the gal who I replaced was in her mid-20s when she quit.
Wow.
Not part of the like PAL kind of teams, but when we played AAU ball. So I had to wait for her to retire to move into that slot. I was not a great hitter, but I was a good fielder. So.
And so you played you played sports left-handed, but you don't write left-handed.
No, I write right-handed. I do most things. Why I play ball left-handed, I don't know. I hit left-handed. In those days, I could hit both left and right, but yeah, I don't know. Maybe it could have been my uncle who taught me. It may have been left-handed. I'm not sure. But or maybe I don't know. I've always been a little strange.
Seems to be a theme.
A different way. Yeah.
Yeah.
I had some, heroes that I liked, watching, and maybe, watching the games, I picked it up from them. I don't know. We would occasionally get free tickets to the Yankee games. There was a jeweler in our neighborhood who had some connection with the police and the PAL and Police Athletic League, and they would give away free tickets to the kids in the neighborhoods. So we went to the Yankee games when they played teams that wouldn't sell out. In those days, it could have been Cleveland and Detroit or something like that. And I remember sitting next to a cop, and he had uh, like a little pen with letters on it. I'm trying to trying to think. I can't even remember what it was now. But I remember asking him what it stood for, and
Mhm.
whatever he told me, when I went home and told my father, he said, "No, it stands for something totally, different."
I think I have your book here. I think it's in there. I remember that story.
Okay, if you can think of the name.
Yeah. Do you remember where it is?
Okay.
I don't know where wait, maybe it's around here somewhere.
It could have been Juvenile Aid Bureau or.
Yeah, the JAB.
And he said it was what?
He was a racetrack cop. It
Aha.
stood for the
Jamaica
initials.
Aqueduct and Belmont.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, the cop told me that his JAB stood for Jamaica Aqueduct and Belmont.
Yeah.
And when I went home, my father told me it stood for Juvenile Aid Bureau. So I never trusted another cop for the rest of my life. And strangely enough, I have a friend now with a good 20 years since we've lived here, who is a retired New York City policewoman. So I used to talk
They're
to
not all
her.
bad.
A Jewish gal from Brooklyn, strangely enough. I asked her about, I told her the story about the racetrack cop. She says, as far as horses are concerned, she said she asked one of the mounted policemen if she could sit on his horse, and suddenly the horse took off. And she says, there I am, flopping around, riding down the street. So said, never again.
So you guys, how far away did you live from Yankee Stadium?
Within walking distance. In those days, we walked a lot, so a good 1.5 miles or 2 miles. I'm not sure exactly.
Not far.
We were on
Close.
top of the hill, so it's good 20 blocks or more, so more than a mile.
Okay.
But when we were up on the roof, my girlfriends and I sometimes would go up there. They would sunbathe. I never had the patience to sit too long in the sun like that. But if there was a game at the stadium, we could hear the crowd roar from there. And across the river was the Polo Grounds, so we could hear it from there as well if there was a game and we were up there. So we were in like walking distance of both, because there was a bridge across the river that we could, walk over to either one.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a good neighborhood to grow up in.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
We had the neighborhood was called High Bridge, and it was named for the a bridge across the river. It was built as an aqueduct to transfer water from one to the other into Manhattan. And so there was a pool on the other side where the pump was, and that's where we would go swimming. It was a city pool, huge place. We would walk across. Again, we walked a lot, miles, literally, to school and high school. And my friends and I, one of my girlfriends and I, walked across the Washington Bridge, which was what the one over the river by us was, across Manhattan, across the George Washington Bridge that went to New Jersey, and then back.
Wow.
So it was, nothing unusual to walk. The only time we took the bus to like high school was when it rained or something. That was a couple of miles too. So we grew up doing a heck of a lot of walking. I was joking with your grandfather about our first date. We went up to the Paradise Theater to see a movie. I think it was Petty Girl or something like that about a models. And from there we walked all the way down to by Yankee Stadium, 161st Street, and it was a good couple of miles. Most people took a bus up that way. But we walked and talked. So, yeah. And I, according to him, ordered the most expensive thing on the menu and wouldn't finish it. I said I couldn't finish it. And it wasn't the most expensive thing. It was just something I wanted to try. So he wanted me to finish it, and I said no, and I gave it to the cat that was there. And I think we walked home. And that's like across from Yankee Stadium, back up the hill. So,
Wow. Nice.
okay, what else?
So you mentioned something in your email about your maternal grandmother and the cat. What is that story?
Oh, the cat, yes. My mother's mother, and that was after my grandfather died. She moved into another apartment on the concourse, Grand Concourse, and she had a cat. And one day while she was babysitting me, I was playing with the cat, and the cat scratched me. She took a broom and she swept the cat out of the house because it hurt me.
Oh, wow.
And she, don't cry, I'll get rid of it, boom, out. So, yeah, it's at the time, I think my Uncle Sam, who was the youngest brother, was living with her. And I remember staying with her and him getting dressed to go on a date he was dating what became my Aunt Iris at the time. I would watch him. He, I don't know how to describe it, put on his shirt, his tie, after he had shaved and combed his hair and everything else, had something, a little snack, but didn't put his pants on until he left the house because he didn't want them to get creased. Just fascinating images, in my mind.
Right. Yeah.
That's how I remember him. After they got married, they strangely enough had lived up the hill from Yankee Stadium on the other side from where we were. But from their rooftop, you could see into the stadium. So when there were games, sometimes the rooftop would fill with residents to watch the games in Yankee Stadium. The only thing you couldn't see was the extreme left or right field corners. That's all changed now, but yeah, it also changed then because the superintendent of the building, started charging people so he can make some money too.
That's like the Wrigley Field here.
Okay.
Wrigley Field, people like have on their rooftops around the stadium. Yeah. They charge for people to go up there and watch the games. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember seeing some of that stuff with the Cubs games. Yeah. So yeah, people do that.
Yeah.
We also spoke about my mother's mother, my grandmother. I remember her Friday night, she would light the candles. And I was always curious, and my mother would wait till she's done, quiet during that time. So it was just watching fascinated me, because it was not something my mother did every Friday night. So the old tradition and, seeing that was interesting too.
So you guys used to have like Friday night Seder dinners. Was that with your mom or your dad's family?
The Seders?
Yeah.
That was the Passover holiday. We would get together at my father's parents' house. My father had 2 sisters and 2 brothers. 3 brothers. I have to think. um, One of them passed away when we were still living. No, actually, it was later. Um, but he was the one who lived on Sheridan Avenue when we lived there, and I really saw him during World War II. I understand he was an accountant by profession, but during World War II, he was constantly in Washington working with the Undersecretary of the Navy, doing secret work. We don't know what.
Interesting.
So it was interesting. And it's his daughter who was became the actress. She appeared in several Broadway shows. My cousin Dorothy then ran her own theater in New York. And when your father was little, a couple of Saturday mornings, I would take him down to her theater where they ran some children's shows. And she and her husband produced a show that toured the country called Little Mary Sunshine, which was a little parody on, good versus evil kind of thing, kind of a fun thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I kept in touch with her and my other cousins on that side as well. So,
So were you closer with your mother's family or your father's family? Or everybody was there all the time, so it was kind of the
probably closer with my mother's side in one respect, but the cousins on my father's side, my 2 cousins, because one was a year younger, one was a year older, and so the 3 of us would get together and do things.
Mm-hmm.
My cousin Cynthia was the one who had as her role model Indira Gandhi. Loved, everything about it. So when we went out, sometimes we go to an Indian restaurant and, taste the foods and things like that. I remember when my grandmother died on that side, my father's mother, we were sitting at the cemetery discussing world events. She decided at that point in her life she was not going to be Jewish. She was going to have no religion. She did not believe in anything. She's the one who fell in love with somebody who was Orthodox and went totally the other way.
Wow.
So it was an interesting to see her change.
Yeah.
Yeah. Her mother worked for one of the I think CBS or early television shows, and try to talk Marv and I into going on the show. Was for young couples who were going to get married and blah, blah, blah. And I really didn't want to, but they kept pushing us to go down and talk to them. And fortunately, we were not selected. We were both reluctant to talk to them or tell them stories. So obviously we didn't make the interview, and it was good. We both felt very good about them. Because I did watch the show and it was really, to me, idiotic. We go through periods of shows on television we've noticed over the years where we have like stupid periods. That was one of the stupid periods. We're going through it now. If you watch the shows that are coming on, it's one of the stupid periods. Now, her husband worked for one of the film companies. And he was a very outspoken conservative in our family. And so when at I think it was your father's bar mitzvah, as the rabbi had just about finishing his sermon, shouted out from the back of the room, "Bullshit!" Without turning around, I said, "Uncle Julie," So, yes, it's interesting family.
Yes.
Which side were we closer to? I don't know. I think both, really, because we spent a lot of time with both.
Right. So I know I've heard a lot of stories about your mom's sisters. So Sarah and
Lily.
Yeah, what can you tell me about them? Because didn't you said you may have lived with they may have lived with you at some point? Sarah did?
Sarah did, yeah. After her husband died, she had married a gentleman, John Ott, and he had, I think, died of some sort of kidney disease or something. But um, hmm, she moved in with us because after my grandmother died, my mother didn't want her living alone. So until she got acclimated, to the new situation, my mother invited her to come stay with us too for a while. Not unusual,
Right. Yeah.
but yeah, she was that way. And Lil, when my sister was born, is the one who would take me down to Philadelphia with her to keep me out of trouble. It seems that when Carol was born, I had seen her almost immediately after she was born. And so the story was I called her one of the ugliest babies I'd ever seen. And I did say that because I had seen her, she hadn't been cleaned up yet by the nurses, kind of thing. And so my aunts grabbed me, stuck me in the nurse's room and said, "Don't you dare say that to your mother." And so during that particular time, they had me go down and stay with Lil until my mother was home and comfortable again and could take care of both of us.
Because you're 5.5 years older? You were five and a half years older than your sister?
Yeah, 5.5 years. And my sister would remind me of that when I'd be flirting with some guy. "You're only 5.5 years older than I am," kind of.
So what was your relationship like with your sister?
With my sister?
Yeah.
Basically, I wound up being her protector. For some reason, I think I had written in my book about the fact that I seem to do a lot of that kind of thing. A sense of righteousness, I suppose. Neighborhood. We saw all sorts of things, happening, and it always concerned me. And so I felt I was able to help where I could, I would do so. And so when somebody took one of these wooden things with the what do you call it, paper clip and a rubber band and shot her and hit her right in the forehead. It could have hit her eye. I was very angry. I said, "You show me who the guy is." It took me down there. I knocked him down and put my knees on his chest and basically told him, "You ever do anything like that to my sister, and next time I'll break your ribs." So she was able to walk and go visit her friends down that way again without anybody doing anything, because somebody would be yelling, "Don't touch her, that's Emily's sister." And she'll come and beat you up. I know it sounds silly, but I'm not the tallest person in the world, obviously. But I had a reputation for being able to beat up the boys.
And so did you? I mean, you have to did you have to get into fights to have that reputation?
Yes. Throughout elementary school, until about 6th, 7th grade. I started there at 2nd grade and worked my way up. And it was just to gain equal status, in a sense, with the boys. I wasn't going to take any nonsense.
Right. Well, then you played baseball with them, so.
Yeah, yes, I did. I was the only girl on the team. We had to climb over the fence because the park attendant wouldn't let me in. But those were days when you've got to remember that even ladies could not go into a bar. There was a ladies' entrance.
Huh,
It,
interesting.
it was different in those days. There was a story I think I may have told in the book as well about um, slacks were coming into fashion at that time for women. Uh, it was not acceptable before then. This is as we're getting into the 50s and 60s, and I always wore jeans anyway. It didn't, bother me. And there was a woman in a restaurant who had seen the restaurant turn away a woman because she came in slacks. And so one of the regulars who was eating there at the time went up to the manager afterward and said, the woman that you just turned away wears them because she had a leg amputated and has a wooden leg. And that's why she wears slacks. The manager was embarrassed and they changed their policy. And little by little, it began to change so that women were accepted. Before that, they weren't accepted in a lot of places if they were not, wearing skirts.
Wow.
So it was the beginning of the, in a sense, women's liberation movement.
Right.
So, yeah, fascinating.
Did you get a lot of slack for playing with the boys team? I mean, I know you said there was the time you had to climb over the fence, but like, did
Not
you?
not from the boys, for themselves. They knew me. We were friends in school. But it was the park attendants, other people who had these rigid ideas that, women had to sit in the back of the bus kind of thing. It's the same thing with the civil rights movement. It hasn't changed.
Right.
It's an attitude. It's the why I suppose I feel as strongly as I do about the political situation today, or this judge that they're about to appoint. It would set back the women's movement years unless we pack the court. So you look for the solutions. In addition, later on, got involved with the League of Women Voters, for example, for that reason.
Mhm.
The league actually allowed men to join back then.
Hmm.
And I had fought to make sure that they did not change the name of the League of Women Voters till the Equal Rights Amendment was passed. And they haven't, and it
Right.
still hasn't.
Right.
So hopefully someday it will be actually equal, and then they can change their name. And there still are men members of the League of Women Voters. So I felt, as I said, one of the meetings that they're more than welcome. We need somebody to stuff the envelopes. So it's getting stern looks over here with a little smirk.
So the neighborhood you grew up in, was it like a predominantly Jewish neighborhood, or what was like the
It was mixed.
demographics? It was mixed.
Yeah, Catholic and Jewish. We were always a minority even there. Largely Irish Catholic and Italian Catholic. There was a Presbyterian church here, and Methodist there, and that kind of thing. But by and large, I think most of the kids we went to school with were either Catholic or Jewish. They all went to Sacred Heart, yeah. That was the big Catholic school on the corner.
Okay.
And yeah.
So did you guys live in that area once you got married? I mean, I know you were in Ann Arbor too, but did you live in Highbridge around there when you were in New York?
We basically lived in that area of Highbridge all the time. We lived in the city. And then when Marv was working outside the city, we moved up to Rockland County, which was, well, I don't know, the geography, but across the river The Hudson River is New Jersey, but just north of the Bergen County, New York state begins again. So we lived in that first county, the smallest county in the state, Rockland County. Now it got its name from the fact that during the Ice Age, all the rocks came down and that's where it stopped and went back. And my theory was that's why all the people who lived there had rocks on their heads. I wrote a story. You want to give me the little white book on top of in right above the no inside the on top? Yeah, no down on the shelf. Yeah, that one. Yeah. I had called it Small Tales of Muddy Creek. The area we moved to up there was called Muddy Creek originally, and they changed the name to Pearl River when the train station, when the railroad came through and set up the station. They didn't think Muddy Creek sounded good.
Right. You'd rather stop in Pearl River than Muddy Creek.
Yes. And why? Because somebody had said that they had found pearls in the river with little pearl oysters, you know, that kind of thing. And so I wrote a book, a little story based on the wisdom of Helm, in which Jewish folklore, all the stupid people live. And I felt that the people there had deserved it, and the entire thing is written in poetic fashion.
Mm.
I had come across an article, and I wrote about it. Is that in Rockland County, there was an article called "The Poor Man's Burger," and what happened was a flock of geese or ducks, geese that fly from Canada every year, had landed there and were making a mess. So they decided to round them up, kill them, and use their meat for food for the poor. There was an outrage reaction from the public. First of all, because of the killing of the birds.
Right.
And second, because the meat itself could be dangerous to human consumption.
Right.
And to me, that personified Rockland County. So they had rocks on their head.
So you moved there for Grandpa's job. That's what you said. You moved there because Grandpa was working out that way?
Well, the reason we moved there is, as I say, Mark was working in New Jersey, just south of the border there. And one of the partners of the company he was working for lived in Pearl River, so we thought we'd take a look. And they were building some new houses there at the time. Mm. And we liked what we saw, and we decided it would be a not a bad place to move to. So that's what brought us there. It was an interesting time. I think we stayed there from the time your father entered school the following year until after he graduated from high school, and then we began migrating elsewhere.
Slowly moving down.
But during that time there, as I say, it was interesting. The league experience for me, especially, there was our league was founded by a lady called Mrs. Charles MacArthur, and most people don't know who she is. Her stage name was Helen Hayes. She was the first president of our league. She was a Broadway star. Her son was Dano in Hawaii Five-0.
Okay.
Yeah, things like that. So yeah, it was interesting from that perspective, and we would. as a woman playing ball, again, that came into play when you were in the JCs. When my husband was in the JCs, and their first baseman had broken his arm. For the last couple of games, I played first base for them. So we played against people who were active in government and, other places that I would have to deal with the league. And I thought it was an interesting reaction for them to see me playing. We had a third baseman on our team who kept throwing it over my head during practice. I stopped throwing him the ball, in between innings. And he said, "Why?" I said, if this is how you're going to play the game, your team's going to lose. Now, you threw the balls over there, you go get them. I'm not getting them.
Right.
That kind of thing. So, and this is a guy who is like 6'3" and, 250 or something like that, who is a town attorney or whatever the heck. It was, I say, always fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
We also
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, we also did exhibition games. The mothers of the kids in Little League played an exhibition game to raise money for the Little League field and stuff like that. Marv actually designed the whole layout, although his name was never on anything. A friend of your father's, John Carey, who he still keeps in touch with, always loved the fact that his mother was involved with one of the schools for kids run by one of the Catholic charities. And Marv designed a pool for them, and they had raised money to have the pool built for them. So yeah, it was an interesting community. The first time I met the woman who was the president of the temple there, her eyes lit up and she wanted me to get involved. She could see me as a future leader, and I didn't want to get involved. I was too busy with the league. But I did tell them I would serve, not on their board, but I would do social action committee stuff for them when I had time. So if they ever had a problem, they would call me and I would either write the articles for them or do a speech or something. So yeah, I was involved.
So, I mean, that seems like it kind of comes from like your family being very involved in the neighborhood. So
as my mother was with everything, yes.
Yeah. So were your parents like involved in politics at all? Was that where you, like, how did you get that involved in politics like you are?
My mother really didn't speak much about it. My father did. He had me arguing with him. He loved argument for argument's sake.
Sounds like Jason.
Yeah, Taft-Hartley versus the Wagner Act, I think, was the first thing that we had done. That's back in the 1940s, late 40s or something like that. So yeah, he got me involved in arguing politics, and that's what got me involved in it.
Were both of your parents, did they both become citizens at some point? Or I think I remember seeing the papers for one of them, but did they both become US citizens?
My father was born here.
Oh, he was born here, yeah, right. Maybe that was
how to become a citizen, yeah.
She did. Okay.
Yeah, she came over when she was school age yet. So yeah. Yeah, it's the political thing was my father's doing. It was his side of the family dates. I just did it again, all the way back to Aaron.
Right.
I don't know if you can see me without this thing that's on the screen now.
I can see you. I think I hear Addie, so we can wrap up soon. But yeah.
Okay. What else?
I don't know. I mean, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, was there any other lasting stories that you remember about either one of your parents?
Either one of my parents.
Yeah.
No, I'm trying to think. No, I do know that, you know, we spoke before about my mother's friends, the three sisters, and well, one of their husbands, Gabi, is strangely enough is the brother of my aunt, my father's sister's husband, the Bookmans. So my aunt Bertha's husband and this guy,
Mhm.
Gabi, his name I think was Jaime, and they didn't want to call him that. He didn't want to call that, so they called him Gabi because he was in the Navy. He was a gob. So he, as a young man, dove off the diving board into my father's face, and that's why my father's nose was crooked. He broke his nose. Anything else you want to know?
Interesting.
Now, what my father was doing swimming underneath, you know, the diving board, I don't know. But
How do you know how your parents met?
how they met? No, I really don't exactly how they met, but I do know that once they did meet, and whenever my father had to work, he would send his brother Richard over to keep my mother company so that she wouldn't be dating anybody else while he wasn't around. Which got my Aunt Lil very interested in him, but it never worked out. So
How old were they when they got married? Do you remember?
no, it was before my time. I imagine probably mid-20s, but you know, which I think was normal for people in those days. But
Right.
sorry about that.
It's fine. With that, my daughter is calling me, so
Go
I think
ahead.
we'll have to wrap it up. But thank you, and we can talk again next week.
Very good. I look forward to it. And if
Cool.
you send me something about what you'd like me to answer, maybe I can look up some additional stuff.
Okay, yeah, I'll send you that over. Cool. Well,
Very
thank you for
good.
talking.
Love it, and thank you.
Yep.
I love
All
it.
right. Love you too. Bye.
Bye now.